Welcome everyone to the second meetup in a series we're doing ahead of the FOSDEM conference. Last week, meetup's recording is up on Contributing.today/past-sessions or on the homepage once tonight's meetup is over. And you can check out our upcoming meetups like on Rust and on Python and on Java on the homepage as well. My name is Flora, and I'm a community advocacy program manager at Microsoft, an open source enthusiast, and also I have a mood disorder. Coincidentally, we'll be talking about mental health in open source today, so that's that is coincidentally. And a trigger warning: today's conversations may contain sensitive topics. So before we get started, I want to call out a couple of things. First, we have a code of conduct, which you can find over at contributing.today/code-of-conduct, which is also where you can find the contact details for the code of conduct team. They'll be monitoring the chat, so let's be kind and civil with each other. The chat that I'm talking about is up on Discord, and you can join straight on the Discord server or in the chat window next to this screen. I'm terribly bad at pointing at the right side. So like I'll have it either way this way. And feel free to ask your questions for our speakers today on Discord as well, and we'll make sure that those get answered. This meetup has been made possible by Microsoft, and we're also streaming to Learn TV, which is an always-on technical stream up on docs.microsoft.com/learn/TV. All right, we'll be using Contributing Today as a hashtag on Twitter casually. So if you want to get involved in the conversation or share with your folks, your community that you're watching this live stream, then make sure to use that hashtag as well. After the panel discussion that's coming up, we'll be talking to Hira Hussain, and she will do a project presentation about the Chain project, which is and I'm going to look at my notes right now because it's a mouthful, award-winning and open source feminist tech project helping survivors of abuse getting the information and support that they need. But first, we'll have a panel on open source and mental health in open source and technology. Allow me to introduce my guest of today. First up is Rain Leander. Rain Leander on Twitter, they, them pronouns, developer advocate at Equinix Metal. Yep. Then we have Tierney Siren, Bit and Bang on Twitter, he, they pronouns, OSS engineering and developer advocacy at Microsoft. And PJ Haggerty, a splenic on Twitter, he, him pronouns, founder of DevRelate, senior developer advocate at Mattermost, initiator of mhprompt.org, an initiative to start a conversation about mental health in technology. Rain, Tierney, PJ, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Happy to be
and
here. Yeah.
PJ, actually, would you like to start us off with a couple of numbers of what mental health in open source and tech looks like? And we'll start taking it from there.
Sure. So as part of my work at mhprompt, we eventually kind of melded into osmihelp.org. And one of the things that OSMI, which is open sourcing mental illness, works on is they work on a yearly survey of people in tech. And so we've been keeping track and seeing how things are going. And one of the things that we found is tech is the third largest industry to have issues with mental health, especially untreated issues with mental health. We're behind like lawyers and first responders, which is kind of, when you look at those groups, you're saying, what are we even doing here at number 3? Yeah. Generally, between about 50 to 60% of people identify as having a mental health disorder. They identify it in different ways. And of that, and granted, the survey is kind of American heavy, but nonetheless, I mean, it is sent around the world. Only about 25% of them ever bother to bring it up to their employer or look into getting help either through their insurance or through some sort of community activity, some sort of therapy, if you will. So one of the things that we try to do is bring awareness to this. We try to bring people wherever we can to share these numbers and let them know what's going on and how, you shouldn't just be a statistic that we're talking about here. You should be a person who's getting help and working with the community to make it a better place.
Rain, Tierney, is this something, are these numbers that you recognize?
Yeah, sadly. I'm not surprised that we're number 3 at all. Yeah, it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is.
I think part of the problem around this, though, is that there's a stigma around talking about mental health and admitting that you need help. I have chronic depression since I can remember. I've had suicidal ideation since I can remember, which is sad but indicative of my childhood. And I have PTSD. And I just decided a couple of years ago that I wanted to help normalize illness. And so I would be honest about my suffering and be very open about it. It's my thing. And I love that there are people like Tierney and PJ and you, Flor, that are helping normalize this and being supportive and whatnot. So I'm not surprised at the numbers, though, sadly.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that a bit and say that, like, it is very bizarre to me that it is so stigmatized because, like, at least in my experience, just, you know, I have ADHD, I have a handful of other things, but ADHD is the primary one I struggle with. One of the things in that is, like, I talk about it on Twitter. Like, I have public discourse about it, and so consistently I have people reach out to me. At this point, it's about once a month, and say, like, hey, thanks for just talking about this. Like, this makes it easier, and this helps it become like this. I've also had people reach out to me and say, like, hey, I didn't realize I had this, and I went to the doctor, got diagnosed, and, like,
Wow.
So there's a lot of things that, like, literally just talking about it, and, like, I'm not, like, trying to say, like, hey, you should go, like, get diagnosed. I'm just sharing the things and my experiences and the challenges I face, and, like, that very little amount of effort of like focusing on myself and sharing what I'm doing has helped others, and so, like, it's such a weird thing to me that it is so stigmatized because it's such a low effort thing to destigmatize it. And I think there's a lot of work being done in that, but it is very, because it's so stigmatized, it's kind of like self-feeding, and it kind of iterates on itself consistently and digs itself a deeper hole. And, like, doing, you know, relatively low effort work, we can kind of get to the point where it's more normalized and accepted and less of a challenge for people.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And just to kind of tag on to that, I think part of the reason why there's a stigma is it's an admitting of a deficiency, and it's not a physical deficiency. Like, no one ever says, like, I'm a developer. I have no problem telling you that my keyboard is a piece of crap. I have no problem letting you know that, you know, I don't have a M1 MacBook, and so I'm not awesome like all my friends. I'm constantly installing dependencies for my Linux box. Like, no one has a problem saying any of these things. They're not stigmatized at all. But as soon as you say that one piece of equipment, my brain works kind of funny. You're afraid. You're afraid that you're going to get the funny look. You're afraid that you're not going to get the job, or the supervisor is going to look at you different, or just, you know, sigh and be like, oh, a problem child. And I think that's where the stigma comes from, which is so weird, because you would never have a problem saying, you know, I'm a developer and I have carpal tunnel syndrome, which is definitely something that prevents you from performing your job to the utmost degree. I say, as I'm wearing a wrist brace, because problems. But, like, honestly, like, you'd have no problem saying that in a job interview. Like, yeah, I need an ergonomic keyboard. So we're gonna have to buy some special equipment for me. But you would never say, you know, I suffer from social anxiety. So when we have big, like, team meetings, when COVID's over and we all get together as a company, I'm really not comfortable in that situation. Or even, you know, we had at one of the first events Rain and I really hung out at here in Buffalo, the first ever Code Days, we had someone who spoke about eating disorders and how every time their company would get together, they'd be like, all right, as a team building activity, let's all make food. Well, when you have an eating disorder, that's something that you're immediately triggered. Yep. Luckily, she was in a very sharing and supportive environment, but that's not always the case. And how do you find out that you're in that environment? And I think that's where the stigma comes from. How do you know you're going to be supported? And how do you know that you've joined an organization that's going to be cool? I mean, not cool, that's not the right word, but comfortable with your issues and helping you with your issues. And I thoroughly believe, yeah.
And not make assumptions based on whatever you have just shared in what you might or might not be able to participate in. you mentioned food. I also, what comes to mind immediately are like all of the drink cups, and there's alcohol involved in a lot of gatherings with the developers. I think that's a similar example.
Or not even just drink cups, but cultural things. Like, I recall a conference that was out in California where, smoking weed is not a problem. It's legal. You're allowed to do it. I can't. This goes into the whole why my title is a splenic. I can't process the THC in pot, so I can't hang out and smoke marijuana. Other people actually have physical triggers where it triggers their PTSD, or it causes them to have anxiety because of paranoia. And everybody's just like, well, it's cool. We're just smoking some weed. We're just hanging out. And that's a huge part of, West Coast tech culture in the US. And yet, people would have a problem saying, like, yo, I don't smoke. It's not cool. I have problems with it. You feel pressured into hanging out.
There's you also touched on like drink cups and kind of like, drinking culture in tech, and like I don't drink. I never have, like, not for a reason, just because I generally just think it doesn't taste good. I prefer way too much soda. But like being someone who doesn't drink, and there are like a lot of stigmas around that because of like addiction and stuff like that. It's been very interesting kind of existing in tech and like being constantly pushed to drink. I have been told so many times by friends and folks, and like I don't really care, like I will have a drink or whatever, like I'll try it, but consistently push like, oh hey, like I'm gonna find something you like it's something that people take on as their own thing, their mission.
It's their mission, yeah.
Right. And so it's and that's not like to pick on anyone specific, but like it's a thing of just like more indicative of people set boundaries, and then those boundaries are pushed because it's like what's considered the norm in tech, and that ends up being I could be telling you right now that like, yeah, I just don't like the taste, but like I could actually have a problem with that and like not be wanting to share that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And like, don't push me in that situation. Like I might not be comfortable sharing with you. It might be you, or it might be in general. And so like in that situation, it's good to like accept and move on. And like when someone requests something or listens or when says that they're not comfortable or they need something, for you to like listen and kind of accept that, rather than to like push it and kind of push that boundary and see where you can kind of help them from your perspective.
Right. And this kind of goes in a lot to how to handle issues with people who have mental disorders, mental issues, mental health issues on your team. Don't go for the pop diagnosis. At least a vast majority of us are not mental health professionals. We understand computers barely. And, so we're definitely not qualified to figure out human brains. One of the things that we talk about a lot at OSMI and at Prompt is the mental health first aid, which is a great way to spot, red flag issues and maybe triage some things before getting someone the help they need. But at the same time, like I shouldn't be like, oh, Rain suffers from depression. I'm going to go in on Monday and tell them that they should definitely be more happy. Like, I'm going to bring some cat pictures. I'm going to bring maybe a calendar of dogs doing funny stuff, because that'll solve the problem. Then they'll be happy and we can get back to work. This is, Tierney, we kind of touched on this when we talked about, we were going to talk about imposter syndrome and what that means and what the pop version of that means. And that's one of the other stigmas to talking about mental health is people kind of co-opting the words. Like there's a difference between I'm feeling sad and I have chronic depression.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. Yet the vernacular is, well, I'm depressed. You're not depressed. Depressed is a long-term acute ailment. You're sad. You're upset. You might be going through a period where you're blue. But even if that's the case, even if that, it's not chronic depression and it's not acute, you should maybe think about looking into a therapist. It's not going to hurt you. I've never known anyone that went to therapy and came out and was like, I am now more damaged than I was before.
I am broken now.
I want to say actually, I have had experience with therapists or with the healthcare system that were damaging. And I was very lucky to be old enough to recognize what was happening and mindful enough to speak up. But for the most part, yes, I agree with that very much. I could go into some stories there, but for the most part, it's it's generally a safe space and a good thing.
I do find it difficult though, and I wonder what your experience is, but trying to explain sort of the context that you're in to your therapist who knows nothing about tech. And will come with very easy solutions to reduce some stress, where you're just like, yeah, well, that's like not really a thing that I have any influence over. So what are you saying? Should I just like open a barn and have some cattle, or like this is not what I'm good at. So I'll have to live in this context. How can I make it work for me? And that's kind of difficult for a therapist to understand. This is my experience.
Mm.
I think that what I've found, especially from folks who are less technically focused, less technically inclined, I guess is a good way to say it. It's easy. You can actually take the problem out of the context, because chances are it's probably not the context itself. It's not the tech itself that's driving your mental issue. It could be another person, like your supervisor. Like, no one's like, Kubernetes causes me to have ADHD.
Well, actually,
I'm just gonna keep saying things that Rain is gonna actually me. That was the whole plan for this whole thing. But seriously, like it's generally not the context. So you need to break it down into a simpler, more general form when you're talking to someone else about it, and say, listen, my supervisor is constantly pressuring me, and I feel like they're putting me in inappropriate situations that I'm uncomfortable with. And that doesn't have to be like, the context there doesn't really essentially matter unless what is inappropriate about it. But it could be like, you feel like you have imposter syndrome and you're uncomfortable talking with people. You're somewhat extroverted, which is on a scale. No one is one or the other, but it is on a scale. And you don't feel comfortable talking to people. And yet your supervisor continually asks you to speak in the weekly meeting. Well, see, that has nothing to do with tech. That has nothing to do with tech. I mean, yeah, there's an agile stand-up there and there's a whole Scrum thing going on. Your therapist doesn't need to know that. That context in and of itself is not important. The problem is, how do I deal with the fact that my supervisor is making this a painful situation for me? And how do I address that? So sometimes it's about taking it out of the technical context, because they're not going to get it. My mom never understood what I did for a living.
I agree.
There's never a possibility she would. It's not a big deal. But everybody has some universal things. Like, we all have supervisors. We all have people we report to. We all have coworkers and people outside that team and communities. That's relatable.
Right. But I think also, so I was going through this anger time, and my therapist said, have you thought about not drinking? Because I was noticing that I would engage in very negative behavior when I was drinking at events, which I have to attend because I'm a developer advocate. And in that regard, I did have to explain context, but it was easier to relate, to be like, look, this is just a cultural norm, that there will be alcohol at these events, that I will have to say no thank you, that I will be in this situation. Ended up experiencing situations that I could not have anticipated, because I had never been in that situation where I was declining drinks, but was able to then go back to the therapist and then went, what about drugs? What about, and like, this is what happened. This is what happened instead. I said, no, I think I did the right thing. Can we talk about my mom again? It was this, we were generally able to take it outside of tech, but within tech, within my job, my position was a very specific Venn diagram of that my therapist had to understand to a certain extent, and thankfully he did. I probably would have found a new therapist if he didn't, because it was important.
Which is
and
straining.
I just wanted to touch on that. I think that, like, to that point, I did have my first therapist in years. They were in, like, they were kind of more of a, like, executive therapist. So, like, their other clients were, like, all, like, VP or C level. And, like, it ended up being a little bit too much. Plus there was, like, he ended up saying some stuff that, like, I didn't really appreciate. And so I just, like, totally dropped him, just because it was, like, not a space that I felt comfortable in after that. And I think to the the point earlier, I think that in addressing one of the comments in chat, I think that as long as you're in a space that, like, you are comfortable with your therapist, and you're feeling like it's actually, like, you found a therapist that works for you, I think that's when you're not going to have a problem with therapy. Like, if it's productive, like, just like anything else. But, like, finding that therapist does take work, and it takes energy and time. And so, like, it seems like, Rain, your therapist did end up working out for you in that context. But, like, if you do have someone who is fundamentally incapable of understanding, which, like, I assume that exists. Like, I would absolutely assume there's someone who's, like, just not gonna click with tech stuff, or, like, the experiences you're having. Then that's another situation where, like, it's probably a good time to, like, begin. And believe me, I know it's really damn hard to find another therapist. I've spent a year looking, and I find, like, I'm having my second appointment with my new therapist since that guy today. So I'm excited for that. But, like, doing that work and is a lot, but it is, like, important to having a therapist, and, like, basically being with someone you're comfortable with. And there's situations where, like, yeah, cool, this just isn't working for me because of they don't understand me, or they don't understand some part of me that I need help with, or I want to talk about, or is fundamental for me to progress. So yeah, I think that I would hope that answers from my perspective your initial prompt, Floor.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a related question from the audience, and I'll try to read it out loud. Is PJ made a point about talking to your therapist about explaining the tech context in detail, but if I heard the stats correctly, something specific is going on with tech workers and mental illness being at a third place. So where does the correlation come from in your what do you think that correlation comes from, and isn't that context important for the therapist to know?
Yeah, so I'm gonna once again give the worst answer that any developer advocate can ever give, yet the one we give most often, which is, it depends.
It depends. Yeah.
So first, I mean, where does the correlation come from? And the research that we've done at OSMI and some other, research that's been done outside of our organization shows that tech, especially open source, appeals to a certain mindset. Generally, especially the point of developer, someone who prefers to work in groups but remotely, someone who prefers to have autonomy, someone who generally, like, in comparison to the general public, would not fit on what they call the neuronormative spectrum. This is a huge thing. And neuronormative is there's a crazy umbrella. And it involves a lot of different things. But what it is this job appeals to people who have mental health issues because they don't really want to deal with others. They want to, be alone. They want to focus. They want to be laser looking at what they're doing, and they want to help others without ever having to talk to them. So that is a big, especially in open source, that's a big thing. So there's your correlation. Why do open source developers and developers, tech people in tech so much? And keep in mind, when we say people in tech, for the most part, we're not talking about your marketing and sales team. We're not talking about, who may have mental health issues as well, but we're not talking about those people that are, like, outgoing and gregarious. People who, like, really want to reach out and talk to everybody. We're talking about people who sought out a job, a position that requires singular individual work. Even if, and that's where I started. That wasn't the reason. I thought it was really cool to solve puzzles. But nonetheless, that's generally an individual pursuit. So there's your correlation to how we end up in third. Is that context important for your therapist to know? In a general sense, yes. I am in tech if your therapist is aware of what's going on in the world and paying attention to statistics is probably important. I work for a startup based in San Francisco that produces an app that specifically follows where dogs poop on the sidewalk so people can avoid it is probably not the context they need. Knowing that you work remote, knowing that you work from home, knowing that you generally don't go to a co-working facility, knowing that you prefer not to be around people, or that you really need to be around people. That's the context your therapist needs to know. And that kind of all resides outside of the technology you're building.
Right. And now that you mentioned also working remote, maybe we can hone in on that one a little bit. As you know, everybody is in various states of lockdown right now. We're not going to meetups, well, except for this online meetup, of course. But we're not going to in-person meetups.
Except for meetups held by Floor. I will go to any meetups held by Floor. There you go.
Yeah.
I get that. So like if you're saying, well, they're not the outgoing talkative person in the first place, I do feel like that did add a lot of stress and anxiety and feeling of hopelessness and like loneliness for people. So apparently those things of being in person and talking to each other, they do have a place in their lives, and now missing out on that. Have you seen, or do you notice that had any effect?
Absolutely. We found like in our survey, like the number of people who felt isolated or felt that they were starting to see undiagnosed issues of depression or anxiety or, various other mood disorders. A lot of it started when I started to have to work from home. Even though I chose a profession that was individual, I would still go into an office and there would be some social aspect. Yeah. Now there isn't, or I'm doing it completely through Mattermost or other chat platforms or whatever. I'm on Discord. So like it's interesting to see. And we see that even outside of tech, like the number of people that are like, having the exhaustion from constant Zoom meetings and constant calls, but this isn't real interaction. Yeah. I'm not going to hang out with Tierney and find out so you're really into sodas. You must be a soda expert. Let's talk about it because I love soda. I love sugar. Granted, I drink alcohol, so to be what I can mix with the sodas we're sharing. But like, I know there's more to all of you than what we're just talking about right now. And it's very difficult to get that context outside of, when you're only you're meeting to talk about the product. You're meeting to talk about the sprint. You're meeting to talk about the code. But you're not meeting to talk about like, yo, I got a haircut today. And, I feel like it's kind of not that fly. And I wish it was, but it's not. Because nobody's seeing you, and half the time you're keeping your camera off.
Half? You're on camera a lot.
I'm on camera. I from working remotely for years, I've had a rule that unless I'm sick, the camera's on. Yeah. Because you need to see my face.
And I think even that point actually brings up something additional. So a couple months ago I moved, but previously I was basically in a studio apartment with a bedroom, and I'm married. So, we were both basically quarantined in this space, and that really limited my ability to actually be able to like turn a webcam on because like where I was sitting, like 70% of the apartment was behind it. Like the only spot that wasn't was like the couch where my wife often sat, but like she needed to like get up and get food or go in the bedroom or go to the bathroom. Like she would walk into frame, and like I don't want to like impose that limitation on her and further quarantine her and like further limit her ability to like exist as a human in the space we share. And so like now I have a room that's like dedicated to this, but like there are often additional barriers to even in COVID, and like people having to work around, this isn't how they expect it to work. And granted, like I work remote, so that was like a choice, and like I didn't expect to be on camera a ton because I was traveling, half of the year. But like there's a lot of different ways in which this is further impacted it, and like even compared to like normal virtual like conference rooms or like in any kind of normal like remote work, this is not even close to normal remote work. And that's an additional concern I have, is that a lot of people are going to be walking away from COVID thinking, oh, like I can't stand remote work because of these additional barriers, which like this is not remote. And remote work, I mean, at least for me, is pretty good for my mental health. It helps me a lot. I also am like lucky in that I have freedom to like, now walk 20 minutes to the office. But like I have a lot of freedom in kind of what I can do, and like normally I don't have that freedom now. The Times Square office is closed. Shocker. But yeah, so like that's an additional layer that like there's more imposition on people now than there ever would be if they were normally working remote, and that is both concerning to me, both for people who are already working remote and people who will consider working remote in the future and like have a thought of, boy, 2 years of COVID really sucked working remote. Yeah.
Yeah,
why did you say 2 years?
Well, let's be real.
I put a real dumper on the whole thing.
Rain, you wanted to say something?
It's actually 2 years is probably correct. Sorry. So Psycorona is this organization that is specifically studying the psychology under COVID. And it tries to do minimal surveys every quarter, for example. It was a lot more active at the beginnings of COVID for Europe. Exploded all over the world, of course, as psychologists all over the world got involved. It was translated into several languages and whatnot. It's global research being done, and papers are being published around this. All this is to say, there is research being done, but the impact of that research and the knowledge of it, it's going to be months and years before we know how much people hate working remote. Is kind of like a pop quick. It sucks because our kids are at home for one thing, right. But because we're not used to it for another, and we have to, like, just the psychology of you have to do this makes it a terrible thing. That you have to eat marshmallows for the rest of your life. You will hate marshmallows.
You're fine with that now. You're fine with that now. Give it a couple years, Tierney.
And so that's kind of a shout out. Psycorona is in full transparency. That's my partner's research. But immediately I thought of it because we're talking about mental health. One of the things they do is specifically check in. How are you feeling? Are you feeling depressed, anxious? You've heard ever like the, I literally was taking the latest survey right before this. And the questions were around, now that the vaccine is out, are you going to be able to get that? How do you feel about being able to get that? Do you think it will make everything better? Do you think it will embed you with microchips? Like it's asking those questions to kind of keep an eye on people's psychology under this new norm. And sadly, I don't think we're ever going back to pre-COVID measures. If you just look at Japan and China with SARS, they've never stopped with the face masks. And
maybe that's not such a bad thing. I mean,
I
feel it. I mean, in as far as like the face masks and things, like since we're disclosing, I'm immunocompromised, and to give a perfect example, I have absolutely no problem telling that to anyone in any interview that I've ever had. Part of losing your spleen, fun facts, part of losing your spleen means that your immune system takes a huge hit. Your spleen does a lot with your white and red blood cells to make sure that they can fight off infection. I could do a whole meetup just about that. But because of that, I fit into the category, because in the US, we have categories of who's going to get the vaccine. I fall into a more advanced category where, like, when old people are done, I'm next, because I'm immunocompromised. And to kind of bring it back, I have no problem admitting that in an interview. I have no problem admitting that publicly at a meetup. I have no problem admitting that anywhere. Yet at the same time, just before we started, Flora was like, I'm a little bit nervous. I think I'm going to mention that I have a mood disorder. And she did it very quickly at the top, but I'm very proud of you for doing it, Flora, and being open about it, because the more we talk about these, the more we talk about how much Corona affects our daily lives.
Mhm.
How
Yes.
I now watch The Amazing Race because I dream about going to airports.
Oh God.
Like
Oh.
that's kind of pathetic, but like it's these things, these things that like we need to talk about them. We need to bring them to the forefront. I think there was a question earlier about, you know, the differences between visible and invisible physical disabilities and mental health. Like great example, you know, a lot of people have a lot of physical disability. Like technically I can be considered disabled because of my immunocompromised state. There are lots of things that I have problems with. It's completely invisible. I mean, other than the fact that I talk about it all the time, but like essentially, unless I tell you, it's invisible. It's the same, like mental health is even more so. Like with a physical disability, it could be something like, oh, I noticed, you know, so-and-so seems to be sitting a lot more often. I wonder if they're having some kind of, oh, you have a back problem, you have a bone disorder, you have osteoporosis. You know, these are invisible things that cause pain or even just chronic pain in general. And a lot of people won't admit to them because they don't want to be seen as less than. Mental health, you're not going to be like, that person definitely seems to be OCD. Like you won't get it. You're not going to pick up on it.
Yeah.
It's and that's part of what leads to the stigma is people want to, there's two sides. People don't want to admit that they have it because they fear to be seen as weak or that they need help or that they're not taking care of themselves. And then the other side of it, and this is in my mind, the worst side of it, is some people go all the other way and they say, well, yes, I have ADHD, which means that I can work sometimes more focused than most people and whip out work for 3 and 4 days straight without sleep. And that makes me a 10x programmer, ergo better than you. So my ADHD is a superpower. And I've seen these blog posts and these hot takes on Twitter, and those are worse than not talking about it at all. Those are actually like, that's not a good thing.
What do you think about that, Tierney?
So I have complex
Sorry
thoughts
for
around that.
putting you on the
No,
spot.
you're good. No, you're totally good. I have complex thoughts around that. I think that I think that anything around like comparing people as better or worse is generally just not going to be a helpful thing. I definitely experience things where like when I can focus, like how I end up working. So like, you know, if I haven't written a lot of content, I got super burned out writing 118 blog posts in a year in my previous role. 3 posts a week.
I could see why that might happen.
Yeah, it burns you out. So like I don't write a ton of content, but when I do, it's because like I have a burst of like I can hyper focus on it, and in that case, like I end up writing like a lot of content really well. That doesn't make me like better or worse than someone though, and I think that like that part, like hyper focus can be super good and can be super useful. It can also be a detractor because like I can't focus on writing a blog post if I don't really want to write a blog post. And so like there's drawbacks and benefits to that stuff. And I think the takeaway there, to me at least, is like doing it as like a better than or improved kind of person is like, that's not the real thing. That's not like, that's harmful to people who do have ADHD because you're misrepresenting to people who don't, and you're creating a false narrative around what ADHD is. And like there are also people who can just like, I know many of them who can just work for days, and like their fun thing is also programming. They're like the thing that they normally do, and then those people like often get into roles where like that's the thing that they work on, and so they're the thing that they can like do really well with, and they care a lot about is what their work is, and so they can just work all day every day on that, and then they do end up being super productive, and then that starts like, despite them not having something like ADHD or some other kind of neurodiversity, they end up questioning like, do I have this? And it's fine to question that, but like those posts end up misleading them and creating a false narrative around what ADHD is. And like, I mean, very similar to DevRel, there is a side that like people see, and then a side that people don't see to ADHD and to a lot of things like this, and like that kind of further glorifies the side that people do see, and like detracts from the challenges of it.
Absolutely. I think we're saying the same thing. You just said so much better than I did.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Okay. maybe we can talk about safe spaces and healthy or unhealthy communities for a bit, and how to participate non-toxically in the community. As we're talking about open source, and I mean, we've talking about, for instance, GitHub as being the platform where open source would happen, or issues where conversation would take place. Like, how can we make sure that we participate in a way that is empowering to others?
Right. I actually just finished a project, an audit of all of Equinix Metal's GitHub repositories. Not all of them. Of the top 100, there are around 450 and counting. And one of the things that I specifically looked at and required was the COC, for example, because contributing and having a certain level of documentation, a COC to indicate the safeness of a space. I want to say this really quick, and if you don't remember anything else, please remember this. A COC does not indicate that a project needs a COC. A COC is a seatbelt of a car. Every car should have seat belts, and it's not because you're constantly getting into accidents. It's so that when you do have an accident, you're wearing your seatbelt, and the damage is not worse than if you weren't wearing the seatbelt. Okay, get off me. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
The other thing is you need to make sure the seatbelt is attached. Like you need to make sure, you can have the seatbelt in the car.
Installed.
Yeah, right. So you can literally have the hardware of the seatbelt in the car, but you need to make sure it's both attached to the car and it's buckled in. And by that, I more mean like having a code of conduct doesn't mean your space is safe. You actually have to enforce it and act on it when it's time to do that. When something, when an accident does happen, you need to actually make sure you're wearing the seatbelt and it's installed.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
1,000% agree.
Sorry, I interrupted.
You should add that to your TED Talk.
No. Suzanne, no, I wasn't actually saying I would give it. I mean, I would happily give a TED Talk, but thank you for coming to my TED Talk is kind of the new getting off of my soapbox thing. I feel strongly about it, and context, I'm an American who lives in the Netherlands, and here in the Netherlands, of course, the culture is not the same, shockingly. But I have run into conferences who were and organizers who were shocked that I would say a COC indicates a safe space. If you don't have a COC, something goes wrong. Seatbelt. And so it's kind of, that's where I'm coming from is beautiful conferences with no COC, beautiful projects, well-intentioned projects. Like if Chain, that's coming up later tonight, didn't have a COC, it's a beautiful project, and it's heartbreaking that it doesn't have a COC. Why wouldn't you? Because you've got to have that safety. You've got to have it installed. You've got to actually buckle the seatbelt.
And I think the interesting thing about COCs too is, and I don't want to trivialize it, but it is so easy to adopt one and at least get started on taking steps of detoxifying a community, or maybe not detoxifying, but at least start saying from this day forward, we're not going to tolerate behaviors that are toxic to this community. It's not so much that fixes problems, but there's the beginning of something. And there's a lot of great COCs out there that actually provide you with steps on reporting. And Flora, you mentioned this about the COC for this very meetup, like the steps on who to email or who to call, who to talk to, like very simple things. And a lot of them also have, like, if you are the person on the other end of that lifeline, what do you do? What are you responsible for? Who do you need to report to? You know, and especially in the physical space, like Rain knows from the events that I've done before, like, you know, we have, you know, like security or someone who's in charge of the building that can help and deal with situations if they get to a certain degree, or remove someone from the conference or what have you. But if you never take the step to even start by saying, I copied the Geek Girl Wiki Code of Conduct, and that's our starting point. Like if you didn't even start there, that's as much effort as you need to get started. And if you're not willing to take that much effort just to look at something and copy and paste it, I mean, we're programmers, we copy and paste all day long. It's what we do. But seriously, like if you can't even take that one step, you're not willing to not have a toxic community. You're not willing to create a safe space. You're not even willing to take the first step. And that's to me, that is sad. That is, it's so easy to do. And I understand that, like, well, what do I do if something goes wrong? What do you do if something goes wrong now?
Yeah, right. And your code of conduct would typically outline that. Like that's
exactly
what it should do. Extending into or beyond code of conducts, I think one of the most important things you can do is when someone does bring something up, you listen to them. There and like try to work with them. Do your best in that space, even if you like genuinely put your best effort into that, even if it's something that you can't like you kind of end up mutually figuring out you can't reach consensus on, or like, you know, implementing something that is effective for them, trying and working with them, and doing what you can to make sure that, you know, your tools or your structure or how you communicate or how you do things is set up. Because like of that, you know, if one person comes forward and communicates something, there's tens, dozens, hundreds more that aren't doing that, because it's like open source has right, exactly. Yeah, open source is like, you know, people will just come by and drop stuff and then leave. It's very low barrier to entry, and so people aren't invested in continuing to engage if it's not working for them. So in that respect, you know, any kind of feedback you do get is probably being felt by many others, and so trying to impact that and take that into consideration, even if, you know, if you can't come to something right now, keeping that in mind as you go forward and as you implement new things or as you continue development or whatever, like continuing to hold that feedback in your mind. And I'm speaking from someone, an interaction I had with someone who, like, I couldn't get to resolution with them. There was a communication barrier. There was just like how the project has operated for years versus how they needed it to operate to make it effective for them. And like, that's something that we tried for months to like work with them. And it just came to the point where like they couldn't really continue investing in this because we weren't able to move the needle enough for them. And that's okay. Like that's happens. But you know, you still need to like hold that in memory and keep that moving forward. And so like, you know, that's something that I would recommend, is at least just listening and trying to address, like, there's so many things that we hold on to that we don't need to hold on to, like certain ways we operate that we do it just because we do it or because it's what we prefer. But like making a very simple change can make an impact. And like, even if you don't want to, just making that change, if it's a simple one, especially a simple one, there's no reason not to do that.
Yeah. And I think even if that discourse is public, that sends a really strong message to people that might be looking to get into the project as well, that, you know, like that there can be discord about things that you disagree on. And I think if possible, if the conversation takes place privately, to try and anonymize it and make it public as a sort of a retrospective, so people can learn from how you deal with feedback.
Yep. Yep.
I have another, but it's a small plug for for the organizers of this meetup, because in October we ran a couple of these meetups as well for Hacktoberfest, and one of the things that we encourage people to do is to look at a project and see if their documentation was accessible and if it was using inclusive language, because we all too often use language like simply or easy. This is easy to install, or you just run it, works. And I think that's also something that we can definitely do to make our communities a lot more welcoming, where we're not assuming that people know all of these things that we take for granted already.
Yeah. Yeah. That languages has become right here over the past 10 years of living in the Netherlands and American-centric me and moving to the Netherlands and what words mean and communicating as an English native speaker and being misunderstood and being like, huh? Why don't you understand me? And no, I didn't mean this, I meant that. Oh, this matters. Language matters. Like, I want a poster. I want a huge poster. Language matters. And I want to send it to every single speaking person. And even not speaking, actually, because even body language matters. It's not as impactful in COVID times, but body language matters. Whether or not I'm looking here where I can see your eyes or actually looking there into the camera, it makes a huge impact on what I'm saying. Language matters. Yes. Thank you, Flor, for bringing it up.
You're welcome. It was not entirely selfless, this plug, but you know. I'm not known as the most humble person, so that's okay. So maybe a question. What can we as individual contributors or project maintainers or even employers do to make sure that our communities, our projects are welcoming and you know, taking into account that people might have, you know, different backgrounds, different different mindsets.
I if I can jump in, my first thing is always adopt the contributor covenant. Adopt it.
Yes.
It's, you know, it's something that I've contributed to, not like heavily, but like, you know, certain things, like I like to alphabetize and make sure everything's spelled correctly and help to find translators so that it's put into other languages. But it's a project that's very near and dear to my heart, and Coraline's a good friend, and she put it together initially, and I've just seen it grow into such great things. I think it's on like version 5 or something like that now, but it's one of the best code base or code community codes of conduct that you can have. It's simply stated. It's very clear. There's a simple version and a more complex version, and even the more complex version is easily readable. And like I said, it's being translated into more and more languages every week. If you by the community, and if you're a project manager, or you are a project creator, or you are an IC, whatever you do it. You know, it was actually something for us that came up at Mattermost, where in Hacktoberfest, someone said, "Hey, you don't really have a COC. What do you think of the contributor covenant?" At the time, I'd been with Mattermost for about 3 days. So I was like, I support this. I accept this PR immediately. No questions asked. And they were just like, no one had ever really brought it up before. So now everybody who's listening, everybody who I talk to, I'm bringing it up now. It's being brought up. Add the contributor covenant to your project.
Yeah. Yeah. And contributors covenant goes kind of along with the DCO that GitHub brought forward. And basically we made either a contributors covenant or a DCO kind of something that we wanted to request from all of our maintained repositories. And some of those were partnerships. And literally every partner that I reached out to, and I was like, hey, I noticed there's no DCO or CC. And I was wondering what was the reason behind that. And again, this goes back to listening. And the immediate reply with everybody was, oh yeah, well, here it is. We can start that. every single partner was like, oh yeah, just oversight, done, added. It's a good idea. And
sorry, go ahead.
it seems to be, it is a simple step to ensure safety and a safe space. But what I was going to add to that is, for me, it's about, and if I were to do a TED Talk, this is what it would actually be about. If imagine yourself in their shoes. I had lived in the Netherlands for 3 months. I was on a subway train headed down south to meet a customer. And I was sitting on my laptop, just not really paying attention to my environment. And all of a sudden, in front of me, 2 men started yelling at each other. In America, this means guns. So I closed my laptop, packed it up, and started walking the other way. This younger gentleman basically was yelling at a conductor. And when the train stopped, he attacks the conductor, and the conductor hugs him and falls over. I'm terrified because all I'm thinking is guns. I don't even know if guns are illegal in the Netherlands at this point or not, or what is legal or illegal. I'm just like, I don't want to die. But we're all now stranded at a tiny little village stop in the middle of nowhere. I don't speak the language. Someone recognizes that I just look terrified and not knowing what's going on. And they said, do you not speak Dutch? Perfect English. I don't speak Dutch. I only speak English. And they explained, well, they explain what's going on. This person was upset, blah, blah, blah. They tell the story. And then she turns every once in a while and translates languages or conversations that are happening around us. And it was mostly about people's concern for the young man who attacked, and how he was sick and needed help, and how would we help him, and how could we get him to the help that he needs, and what must be going on in his life that he was so stressed. And that was the beginning of my, oh, that is another way to approach stressful situations. That is another way to approach a conflict, is what must be going on with you that you are lashing out to me. And now I'll listen to what's going on. It's walk a mile in another person's shoes. It is cliche, but thinking what could possibly be going on, it changes your mind shift.
I'd like to add a little bit to that, in that, like, definitely, as you, the higher up on the ladder of privilege you are, the harder it is to imagine actually walk in the shoes of those that are further down it. Like, there is just so much that you don't have the ability to comprehend because of your own experience. So that's the one challenge there that I think a lot of people who are more privileged end up falling on, is that they think they can empathize, but there's so much more complexity, systemic complexity, that they're not aware of. It's reasonable that they're not aware of it. They need to work on making themselves aware of it. But like, there is only so far down that ladder you can go before you get to a point where you could end up being harmful when you are trying to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. So that's just kind of an extension to that. To Fleur's point, I think outside of things like a GitHub repo in your organization where you can put a code of conduct that will apply to all repos, or having a base template repo that you then have everyone from there on create so you can manage that. It won't retroactively apply, but it'll apply to the future. And then you can have your kind of code of conduct there, and then people can, when they're making a repo, you use this as your base, and then you move on. From that, I think where I'd go is just making sure that you're including people. So, some people, like, I'm a person who talks way too much. Like, I will very aggressively talk throughout an entire meeting, until to the point that, like, unless I stop myself, or unless someone else stops me, which I generally try to do, stop myself before someone else does. It's good to make sure, like, kind of keep a mental count of who has talked and who hasn't, in both digital discussion, or in both forms of digital discussion, like text and something like this, like a meeting. Not that this is a meeting, but like a video chat. So making sure that you're hearing from everyone, and if someone's not able to attend, making sure you're following up with them and making sure their voice is heard and their thoughts are heard. Because there's all kinds of reasons why someone might not speak up, whether it's, they're... I play games with a lot of tech people at night now. That's one of the ways I've coped with COVID. And there's different kinds of people. There's people who do talk a ton, and then there's people who don't. And the people who don't often, like, they talk a lot more when the people who talk a ton aren't present. Just because, like, they leave a lot of space for the other people, the people who do talk a lot. But when those people aren't taking up that space, then they take up that space. And so just making sure you're creating space for everyone in any medium, in a project, is a really good way to be a little bit more inclusive in terms of both mental health, race, other things like that.
Yeah.
Related, how can we practice maybe kindness when we're writing an issue or a pull request? Maybe this is something that people can take to heart, and next time they do a code review or create a pull request, they can keep it in their mind.
Yeah. I feel
considering the receiver.
Yeah, I feel like in some ways Rain already answered this. Think about listening more than speak. It's kind of a combination of what Rain and Tierney said. Listen rather than speaking. Think about if you're creating a pull request or you're creating some sort of issue that you want someone else. How would you feel reading it? Like, maybe sleep on it, unless it's like, oh my God, this is going to break the build, and everybody's AWS US East is going to go down again if we do this. Unless it's that dire, sleep on it. Write it, sleep on it. Walk away, come back, reread it. Look at it and say, is there any way I could take this poorly? Is there any way I could have worded this better or more kindly? Take your time. I'm not going to lie. I'm definitely guilty of flippant responses and flippant PRs. I'm not going to, like, we've all done it. It happens, but you should learn from the experience and understand that you need to be kind when you speak to people, especially because a PR is a request. It's a pull request. You're asking someone for something. Even if it's just to accept your code, you're asking someone for something. It's a lot better if you ask kindly instead of just saying, this is the reason why, and this is why you should do it. Do it now, maintainer, because I know you have nothing better to do with your life than to maintain this particular code base. It's like one of those things where, like, going back to doing open source in the 90s, yeah, I'm old, is one of those things, like, you would have thought that we should have learned this by now. It's been 30 freaking years. Like, we should have learned this lesson by now. We haven't at all. But again, it's think about how it's like a golden rule from kindergarten. Treat people how you want to be treated. Write PRs the way you want to read them. And if it takes that to walk away from it, come back, reread it. Are you satisfied that was a kind statement?
Yeah.
You want to go next?
Yeah. I find that empathy is sometimes difficult, right? So my level of empathy and being able to think about where another person is coming from is going to be very different than yours, than theirs and everyone else's. And so with kindness, it is a skill, just like anything else, just like lifting weights. You have to practice this. If your empathy is not as deep as it could be, then it's something that might need research. It's a skill you learn. I will admit openly that over the past 9 months, 300 days to be exact, that the Netherlands has been on lockdown, my interpersonal communication skills have gone in the toilet. The actual idea of saying, I feel that I am not being heard to an individual in person is such a foreign concept to me right now that that the idea of it makes me want to throw up. And yet it used to be a skill that was, I thought, was innate and everlasting, but that muscle has withered and died and needs to be rebuilt. And the same thing goes for kindness. If you've never practiced kindness before, there are books out there. There are literally psychology research on kindness. There are things that you can do. There are organizations you can turn to develop that muscle. And then, yes, I agree. Oh my goodness, sleep on it. Yes. And then something that I am trying to do lately, like for the past month, I've been working on kindness to myself, because I'm really good at being empathetic with you. I will talk you through things, and I am an asshole to this guy. Like, so mean on the inside. I would never say these things to my kids or my partner or even a stranger, maybe to a Nazi, but I'm so mean. And so I'm working on that kindness muscle. And that's the thing. Everyone has their level, and you got to work on it. Tierney, what about you?
I think going into someone's project, doing my best to follow what they've set forward. So I work in Node and Electron and TC39 in a bunch of areas, and they all have their own very distinct processes. Especially the more complex the project, the more complex the process. Showing up and just like dumping something on them is not helpful. That's a great way to like build resentment, because like, cool, now I have to go tell this person that like their thing doesn't work, and like I can't use this. Like, the problem they're trying to solve, I can't accept. Like, I can't accept their solution because they didn't do what they needed to do, which then adds to maintainer burden. Like a lot of what I think a lot of folks focus on is reducing maintainer burden, and going in and dropping a PR, deleting the PR template, and just saying like, I fixed this thing, here's the code, and like not providing a repo, or like if you're creating an issue and saying like, I have this problem, well then you're and then not provide, like deleting the part where you need to like provide the repro. Like, I can't accept that. Like, now I have to ask you for the repro that you deleted. Like, just do the thing in the first place. So like that is practicing a form of empathy toward the maintainers, that I think is something that is like a relatively low barrier of just like, they have done all of the work for you to know what you need to do. So like, put that effort back in and, get that, provide that kind of feedback back to them. I think that's, the big thing I'd say there.
I am smiling in shame because I definitely have deleted some of your templates.
Damn it, Floor. Look at you.
You were supposed to be our kindness template, Floor.
I'm sorry, I will never do that again.
No, I mean,
I
like,
feel like Tierney is watching me all the time. So
I do it on my own. I do it on things I maintain because I know like I can skip this. Like, I know the things that I need to do have been done, but like if you're coming to someone else, like it's helpful to do that and reduce that burden for them.
Definitely.
So,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to call you out.
I'll never do that again.
I'm sorry.
We're coming to the end of our panel. We have another project presentation to have a look at. So can we do like a round of maybe parting words, kind advice?
Sure.
PJ.
For the peeps watching at
do you want to
home.
do it?
Favorite
So yeah, I mean,
music quote.
Sure.
so I mean,
you don't want mine.
I'm just gonna go with the closing words idea, but like, yeah, just quickly, mental health is a serious issue in tech. If you feel like you have a problem, look into getting help. If you don't know where to go to osmihelp.org, look into the resources there. If you're worried about people that you work with or people in your community, check out mentalhealthfirstaid.org. There are hundreds of organizations around the world that are currently doing online learning to spot the red flags in people's mental health, even relate. So take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, try to make a better place so that all of tech is a better place. I think that's my biggest message.
Yeah. And mine is short and sweet. Put your own oxygen mask on before you put on others. Please. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself.
You and your analogies, Rain.
They're amazing, aren't they?
That's 3 TED Talks. You're welcome.
I think mine is like, it's okay to step away. That's one of the things I've had to learn. Like, it's okay. Like, I don't know, a lot of the time things won't die if you walk away for a bit. If you walk away for a day or a week or a month, it's fine. There's that one really good screenshot of like a maintainer who is in like Uruguay or Ukraine. And like they responded with, "I'll take a look at this in a very long while, because we're having a revolution right now, and like I'm not going to deal with this." And that's a very great one. So yeah, I think like keeping that mindset of like, I can step away from this for a minute, and it's okay. And like, if you want to communicate that, absolutely do, like saying like, "Hey, I need to take a break for a bit," or like, I'll look at this tomorrow or something. That's a great way to just practice self-care and
And set expectations for others as well.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you 3 so much for joining. And hopefully you can join us on the Discord server for a little bit longer. I feel like there's some questions that we might not have covered, but maybe you can still, have a look at them right now.